Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Wall's End history story. This week is a short little story covering some details of something known as the Ancient Order of Foresters, which operated in Willington Quay and Howdon area from around 1864, although most of the story dates from 1884. I hope you will enjoy it and find it interesting, but I must add that this is somewhat different to the normal kind of stories that I cover about the history of Wall's End. And I also want to add that similar things to this also operated in the rest of Wall's End, as I have read of payments for burials and payments for deaths in other articles, but I am just really focusing on the one in Howdon for this story. According to the articles at the time, 1884, the date when these societies first began was lost to the mists of time, but it was felt that they had been running for many years prior to 1884. Obviously, they were not able to look up information in the same way that we can today, as a quick Google search suggests that the society was first set up in 1834, so perhaps the details were not quite as lost as was thought in 1884. It was said that in 1864 the Willington Stables, as the area was known at the time, branch, first opened, meeting at the Engine Inn. It was known as Court Willington number 4757 of the Northumberland United Division of the Ancient Order of the Foresters Friendly Society, rather a mouthful. In 1884 it had over 150 members and around £600 in its account, which would be around £93,000 today, so it was doing quite well. It was really quite a good idea. How it worked was people would pay a premium, somewhat similar to a life insurance today, paying in either weekly, fortnightly or monthly. The maximum amount payable was 1 penny per day. And then, if a member was in need of medical assistance, which of course had to be paid for in those days, they would receive up to 10 shillings per week. And if a member died, their family would receive a payout between £8 and £12. And if a member's wife died, then it would be a payout of between £5 and £10, coming down to an amount of between £1 and £3 for a member's child's death. Obviously the payments then were the same as today and based on what you paid in, but it does seem that there was a minimum amount that would be paid out, so even those who were not able to pay in a lot would get a decent amount back in the event of a family death or illness. Also included in the scheme was a provision for members' widows, meaning that if they remained in the scheme for a lower monthly payment, their family would receive a payout to cover the cost of their burial on their death. Of course, it was very much focused on life insurance, as funerals back then were quite expensive, and many could not always afford to bury their family members. Even basic coffins could be quite expensive. So anything to help people with this worry, as it obviously would have been in those days, was always going to be a good thing. So it was no wonder that the society was doing so well, especially when you consider some of the higher payouts would be around £1,800, £1,500 and £500 in today's money for the £12, £10 and £3 payments in 1884. In June of 1884, the Order of the Foresters were going to have a parade around the area. This, it was said, was going to be an annual parade, and we can only assume it was intended to promote the society in the hope of gaining more members. Those taking part met up at the Engine Inn public house where they still held their meetings. The procession was led by someone known as Brother Barnes, who was one of the oldest members of the order. The procession set off from just outside of St Mary's Church, with the main members walking on foot, followed by the Hebburn Colliery Band. After them came the standard of the order, which sadly was just simply described as being gorgeous, but I wasn't able to find out exactly what was on it, or what it looked like. However, I did do a quick online search, and it is possible it was either red or green, as there were some images of the sashes worn by the members, which may have been similar. but there was no images of the standard itself. But the sashes were indeed nice to look at and very colourful and bright. After this, in the procession came 4 men on horses, and unlike the standard, these were described as being dressed in a rather grotesque manner, and they were all carrying bugles, though it must be said there was no mention of these actually being used. And finally, at the rear of the procession were the remaining members of the society, walking smartly along, as the paper said, like well-trained soldiers. The procession went round Willington Square, then down to Rose Hill, Willington Quay and parts of Howdon, before heading back towards a field where sports and other activities were to be held. This was on the Willington and Rose Hill cricket ground. Now, I did try to find this on a map, but unfortunately all I could find was the football ground. I have to admit that the procession sounded quite impressive, and I expect many of those who lived in the area at the time would have turned out to watch it pass by. Some of the games that were to be played at the event really made me smile, because there were things like flat races, sack races, skipping races and the 3-legged race, and that made me think of the good old school sports days. And then I wondered if there had been an egg and spoon race. However, I quickly found out this one wasn't invented until 1894, so a little too early for the 1884 event. There was also archery and football competitions, and apparently some large, greasy poles were spread around the field, with legs of lamb at the top of them for anyone who was able to climb up and reach them. Now, I did wonder if anyone managed to win any of those, and if they didn't, what happened to them after the event. Perhaps they had a big feast a few days later and cooked them all. Apparently there was one failing in the day's events, and that was that there had not been enough tea available for the amount of people who had attended the sports event. It seems the organisers had not expected quite so many people to turn out, so only had limited supplies available. So a lot of people had to do without. Now, luckily that wouldn't have worried me, as I'm not a lover of tea to begin with, but I expect back then there would have been a very lot of unhappy people because they had not got their advertised free cup of tea. The most successful part of the whole event was said to be the ball. The Heben Colliery Band provided the music, and the article stated that many lads and lasses twirled round the floor in the enormous marquee, which was so busy that at times people could not even get inside, let alone dance. But waltzing was the order of the day, and many people seemed to find the space to take part either inside or outside of the marquee. One thing I did notice about this event, and others I have covered recently, is that it was always seemed to be the Heben Colliery Band who provided the music, so they must have been very much in demand, until the later bands such as the Rising Sun Colliery Band and the Swan Hunters Shipyard Band started to take their place in the local events when they were set up. All in all, the whole event of the Order of the Foresters was described as having been a great success, and I do wonder how many more members that they may have gained for their society. So just to end this story with a little more information about the ancient Order of Foresters for anyone who might be interested. Based on my searching, the society was still going in 2016. I could not actually find any other details about it after that date, where it had in 2016 been renamed as the Foresters Friendly Society. It had originated in Manchester and had over 300 branches in the UK in the early 1800s. And it was indeed the forerunner of today's insurance companies, though back then it was run for the people of each town, by the people of the town, until no doubt the society became a business and expanded into the insurance companies that we know of today. And if you actually think back to the earlier comment about how much you would be paid out, the 1,800, 1,500, That is also very similar to the kind of payments that people could expect from insurance companies today. So it really was very similar to that sort of thing. I do hope that you have found this short little story interesting. I know that, as I said earlier, that it has been somewhat different to the usual history stories that I write about the Wallsend area, but I did find the whole thing fascinating, a fascinating glimpse into the past, and I hope that you enjoyed it too and didn't find it to be boring. I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.